Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis. I'm a marriage and family therapist and licensed professional counselor trained in trauma and addiction. The Asking Why podcast is for anyone on a journey of healing and restoration. If you are searching for answers to life's questions and want to learn more about root causes from a psychological and theological mix, this show is for you. In this podcast, myself and a co-host from Clint Davis Counseling and Integrative Wellness will interview guests on a wide range of topics in order to get down to the heart of the problems facing our world and understand why things happen and how to change the world and ourselves for the better. Want to learn more tips and tricks to living a healthy lifestyle? Visit us at Clint Davis Counseling and Integrative Wellness on Facebook and Instagram. If you want to meet our staff or book a speaker, go to clintdaviscounseling.com. Thanks for listening and be sure to subscribe today. All right, welcome to Asking Why podcast, episode number 36. We got Jenny Martinez and Josie Martinez. Really excited to have you guys. These are some good friends of mine. And so we are going to talk about EMDR and trauma therapy and a bunch of stuff. So I think one of the goals of having you guys on is to be able to give kind of a personal touch, a real testimony. Now, you guys weren't my client, so that makes it easier, because I don't have to do that weird, dual relationship thing. So thank y'all so much for coming in and being able to talk about it. I think one of the problems that we have that I want to kind of cover today is maybe the church's view of trauma therapy or EMDR and their fear about it, and what are their worries and why should you do it and what is it? And then also just general, I think the average person not knowing how things in life can affect you. I mean, I think people know it. They just don't talk about it regularly because we're scared that we're the only ones or we're uniquely broken or whatever. And so your mom and daughter, and I thought that was cool. And also getting a young person's perspective, I think is really important because, and we'll talk about this later, but therapy is kind of on the rise, but I think there's also still some stigma to kind of get worked out. So that's why we're here. So tell us we'll start with Jenny. You tell us who you are, what you do, and
I
talk about Batter Up Bake Shop a little bit. Yeah.
I am Jenny Martinez. I am wife of one and mom of many. We have 5 kids, Philip and I do, ages 20 down to 7. 7. Sometimes I forget that bonus baby's age. So we just have a large family. We call ourselves the circus because my husband always says that we're just one tent shy of being an actual circus.
Oh, yeah.
So I have 2 big kids and 3 little kids, so we call them the bigs and the littles. And so they're kind of a little bit separated by age there, but it has worked out to really be a blessing. We're a blended family, so we have dealt with a lot of issues with that and just learning how to manage it. I run a baking business called Batter Up Bake Shop. It started out of my house about 9 years ago, and the whole goal with that business was for me to be able to stay home with the little ones when they were little, and then also be home in the morning before school started and in the afternoon. That was important to me. That's what my mother had done, and I believe it was a gift to us. There's 7 of us kids. So it was really important for me to be able to stay home, but when you have that many kids, you kind of need some finances too. Yeah. It's expensive. So it just started out in my house and then kind of exploded, and now I have a commercial kitchen space that I rent. And I do made-to-order baked goods and catering.
How did you start it out? What were...
Cupcakes.
Yeah.
Cupcakes and cinnamon rolls. I just kind of...
Which the cinnamon rolls are my favorite.
Yes.
They're so good.
They're so good. I did find out when I moved down south, I'm from the Midwest, and so when I moved down south, I really couldn't find a cinnamon roll that I really liked in any of the bakeries, and my mother baked all the time, and so I kind of started with that and sold them via social media and email. Louisiana has a cottage food law that allows you to bake out of your home legally as long as you don't go over a certain amount of sales a year. So as long as you have all your ducks in a row and you file your taxes and do all that, you can safely do it out of your home, which is a blessing, and I think could be more utilized in the community for other moms, because it's a way to be able to stay home and make some money if that's a passion that you have. So I started out of the house, and I just kind of started telling people, I'm like, I think I'm going to start charging for this, because I did a lot of favors in the beginning, and Philip sat me down and he's like, enough favors. I think we need to see what we could do with this. Yeah. And so that's where it started.
And then Philip, your husband,
yes,
he works for he worked for juvenile court for a long time, right?
He did. Yeah. He worked for Caddo Parish Juvenile Court. He now is the program director for CASA, which is Court Appointed Special Advocate. And he's been there for about a year.
Yeah, I think that's important because for people listening, you guys have had some context to mental health and kids with mental health and things like that. You come from divorce and blended family.
Right.
And so I think that's led into the thing we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yes, a lot of it, yes.
Yeah. All right, Josie.
Okay.
Give us your spew.
Well, I am Josie Martinez. I just graduated in May from C.E. Bird High School. And I will be attending Northwestern State in Natchitoches in like 2 weeks. So, I've just been getting ready for that. I'm the second big. So I have my older brother, and he is actually my only biological. It's how kind of the blended family also is. My younger siblings, I consider them my own, but they are my half. And so, but I don't know, just getting ready for school. That's kind of my spiel.
Yeah, you excited?
Yes, very much. Excited, nervous, all the things.
Do you know what you're majoring in?
Elementary education.
Okay. And what brought that about?
Actually going to tour Washita Baptist.
Mm-hmm.
I had to just pick something else, and I have been called to work with kids since not elementary school, since freshman year. And when I went and toured there, and they asked me, well, why'd you want to go into teaching? I was like, to be honest, I didn't want to. I just needed to think of something else. And after talking to the dean there, I was like, okay, I think I could seriously do this. And we looked in like the room that we were in. It was like all decorated in like construction theme type of stuff. And my mom was just like, you could so do this. You would have a blast doing it. And I was like, well, let's give it a shot. And so that's my plan so far. And then if that ends up not working out, I took psychology this year at Bird, and I really enjoyed it. And I've thought about doing like child psychology counseling.
Mm-hmm. It's a big need.
Yes.
Speaking of that, so talk to me. Let's start with you a little bit on, since you have less content than Jenny does on the trauma world,
right?
But you have some. So kind of tell me or tell people, what is your testimony? I mean, you're both Christians. You're both very faithful in your walk with Christ, and I've seen you do that as a young woman, which I'm super proud of. I love on Sundays looking up and watching you go pray with people and just be engaged. And plus, you've kept my kids, and I know your heart. So, it's safe to hear that story from me. So, kind of tell us from the divorce standpoint, in whatever context you want to, your story, your testimony, and how that led to therapy and Emdr, and then we can get into that later after we hear your mom.
Right. So, for most of my, childhood, which it was actually just till about 5, I had only really known it being me, my mom, and my brother. My mom and my biological father were divorced when I was little, and so I don't really remember having that actual family. I remember it just being us 3, and then Phil came into our lives and got married, and they got married when I was 5 years old. And so I've always known him as my father figure, and always the one being there and supporting me in school and softball and stuff like that. I could have just the typical, I got saved when I was 7 and got baptized when I was 7. And, you have some high schoolers or when they get older, they did that baptism when they were younger, go, I didn't really mean it, but I do truly feel like I remember it really well, and that is truly when I got saved. But my faith wasn't really tested until about 8th grade. Well, actually 6th grade. My biological father decided to move up to Shreveport from New Orleans,
So you were 11? 11,
yes,
12?
Roughly, yes. He had moved up to Shreveport because he wanted to be closer to me and my brother, and then fought for joint custody. And so all throughout middle school, we went 1 week at Mom and Phil's, and the next week we went to my dad's and his new wife. And so it was okay at the start, and then it really took a toll on my grades, and it took a toll on my attitude and my siblings, and mom's nodding.
Attitude.
Yes. It took a big toll. My grades had plummeted, and one of my teachers had called my mom and was like, what is going on? She is not this type of student. And my mom had explained what was going on, and he was like, that makes total sense. And so he had actually helped me a little bit, try to get my grades back up and stuff, and I couldn't think of enough for that. And then in 8th grade, my biological father and his wife got divorced, and that was the first divorce that I really kind of understood what had happened, because he had been divorced before that with my mom and with my other stepmom, Courtney, which I love her to death still. But I didn't really understand what it was, what was actually happening. It was just kind of like, oh, they broke up. Like, that's just it. But this one I kind of understood, okay, like, this is it. Like, there's no going back. And I had always looked up to that stepmom, Holly, but then kind of figuring out what had happened and the reasons, I was like, wow, this was actually a pretty hard, this is a home that just struggled. And so then March of 8th grade, I had decided that for the benefit of me, I need to be in one household. I need to have that structure, and I need to only be in one place. And so I chose my mom's because there was structure, there was always a constant, and she was always there, and Phil had been there since I was 5, and I had my siblings, and I knew that, and it was a home that was loved, and it was a home that just helped you, like, spread the gospel and brought you to Jesus and stuff like that. And so that's where I had decided to stay, and I said that I will choose when I want to see my biological father, and I did. I chose if I wanted to go to lunch with him or if I wanted to go stay the night there. But then my faith was, like, super tested my freshman year.
So let's pause there.
Okay.
So, super brave of you to share. I'm proud of you. Can you talk a little bit about, because I think a lot of people think when kids, like, I like to say, I come from a divorced home. My parents divorced when I was 8. But a lot of people in culture treat divorce and adoption and all those things as if they're basic run-of-the-mill things that don't affect us. And especially kids, that they just kind of, as long as there's no big bad trauma, then it doesn't affect them. So can you talk about, like, if you're a parent out there and you have a kid and you're going through divorce or custody or any of these issues, can you tell what would maybe be the benefit of getting into therapy earlier? Do you think people should get into therapy earlier?
I feel like definitely. Going through that divorce, I realized how much collateral damage happened, but even going through the whole week on and week off, I could see the collateral damage in my younger sister, Izzy, and she just couldn't understand, why do Josie and Houston have a different dad? Why do they switch? Like, what's going on with that? And she actually did go to therapy a little bit for it, just because she couldn't understand the concept of because it wasn't a problem until middle school, whenever the joint custody had happened. So I think, like, for Izzy, it was super beneficial that, like, she was able to go and she was just able to talk about it and be like, why is this going on? Like, why does Josie have a different dad than I do? I've only known her to have the same dad. And I think and me going to therapy, like, during week on, week off, I think it was good that I was just able to talk about it to somebody that wasn't going through the situation, because sometimes that's just something you need. Like, sometimes you don't want to talk to your mom about it because she's going to have a completely different perspective on the situation than you do. And sometimes you don't even want to talk to your friend about it because he or she is a part of it still, because they're your friend. And so it was super beneficial for me to go to therapy because I was able to talk to my counselor about it, but she wasn't in the situation at all. She was there to just sit and listen and guide me through it.
Yeah. It's awesome.
So, yeah.
Okay. So then keep going. Okay.
Freshman year is whenever my faith was very tested. Freshman year was a very hard year for me. Over Thanksgiving break, me and my brother found out that our biological father was arrested, and we could not understand the concept of it. We were in denial. We were like, there's no way. And we had been explained that, like, he had, like, fled, and that he, like, fled the street, New Orleans, and to try to run away from the law, and we were just like, what? It was like our whole world was just starting to fall apart. Like, and I ended up getting so mad at the Lord. I was like, my life was already hard. Why is it getting worse? Like, why did this have to happen? And then, you know, I got angry at the Lord, and I turned away from the Lord. I did not go to him for it. I would go to therapy, but whenever my counselor told me you need to turn to the Lord for this, I did not. I was like, no one's here to help me. I need to do this myself. And then February 12th, which is actually my birthday of that year, I was on my way to a softball game, and Phil came to pick me up and said, everybody's fine, nobody's hurt, but the house is on fire, or the house was on fire, and we have to go home. And then I was an hour away, and my mind just kept racing, like, what does it look like? What do I have left? Do I have anything left? Or is it completely to the ground? And when I got there, just about everything I had was my softball uniform that I had on, the Converse I had on my feet, and a pair of PJs. And it was the Lord telling me, like, you don't have anything you can turn to anymore. Turn to me, trust me, and I am going to bring you through this, and I'm going to use this to bring glory to God. And that was the point where I was like, oh my word, I don't have anything. I have the church, and I have the Lord, and that's when I definitely think my faith grew exponentially, because I became from not having hardly anything. And yeah, definitely.
That's good. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So I'll let your mom catch up with the story, and then we'll dive into what we did about all that.
Sure. So I think
how's that hearing Josie talk about it?
She's grown so much.
I know, right?
She has grown so much, and we had really prayed for God to use our family, and I had prayed through divorce for God to use the divorce to further the kingdom, and to use my testimony and the pain and the struggle through all of that, because it was not what I wanted to happen. And it did, regardless of what I wanted or what I knew the Lord wanted for it. It just was poor choices made on both sides. So I have to own half of that. I got myself into it, and I own half of that divorce. We were unevenly yoked when we got married, and I knew it, and I went ahead with it anyway. And then I brought 2 kids into it. So they are the greatest blessing from that, but it's half mine. So it will always be with us because of decision that I made, regardless of what he did. It was the decision I made then. But when the kids started going back and forth, and we saw like Josie said, collateral damage, which is a perfect term for it, happening to everybody around us, we noticed it with the other kids in the house, and Izzy especially. And so counseling at that point for a child that young, I didn't really understand how it would benefit her, because none of the rest of us had ever counseled that young. Right. And I have counseled a long time. But for Izzy, the counselor that she had did play therapy with her, and that was super beneficial, but also taught her incredible coping skills. And so I remember her telling Izzy they would make a map of where the kids were going to be that week. So because younger children can't understand the concept of time, and so they don't know what 7 days is. How far away is Sunday for real? Because in their world, it's forever. Right. So, but if they have a physical map that they can look at, and we would put the pictures of the kids' faces on it, and we'd be like, this is the day we're on here. And then we'd have like a little house where you could get to the other end of it, and we're going to this day, and then they come home. So that was easier for them to be able to visually see something when they were going to come back home. And then when they would get super sad and miss the big kids, they had a Josie box and a Houston box that they would open up that had things in it that made them feel closer to them. So they had a stuffed animal, I think.
They used a lot of my stuffed animals. I still love stuffed animals. I will gladly admit it. But I had a couple stuffed animals that I would leave on my bed, and me and Izzy shared a room. And so sometimes she would grab one from my bed and sleep with it at night, and Maggie Jo would grab one. And Houston had a pillow that he always used, and he would always bring it out to like the living room and stuff. Right. And I noticed a lot, Maggie would typically grab the pillow and just go sleep with it. And so we would make sure that there was stuff there for them to be able to grab and be able to say like, all right, I can hold on to this. It's a little piece of Josie, or it's a little piece of Houston, and be able to be okay until they get back home.
It was an easy way for them to cope. It was actually something physical they could touch or see. And so that was super beneficial. And then they learned, because of that at an early age, when their big brother went off to college and he was 10 hours away from us, and we dropped him off in August, and we weren't going to see him again until November. And when you're a big family, you're around each other all the time. You're used to the noise. You're used to particular people being there, and all of a sudden he was gone. And so it was a loss. And so they knew to go ahead and make those boxes again, and it was something that they could open up. So they would put a Scooby-Doo movie in it because Houston loves Scooby-Doo. And they would put like a wrapper, a Cheez-It box or something like that, and that just always made them happy, made them smile, got them over the moment of grief and sadness. And then they could pack it up, put it back under the bed, and move on. So it was really beneficial.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So how did you, tell me a little bit about your story and leading up to, I mean, however you want to tell it.
Okay. So
leave it open.
I became a believer when I was in my early 20s, and lived in Minneapolis. That's where I met my ex-husband at. And we moved to Shreveport. We'd had Houston, and then we moved here, and we had Josie, and then he left before she was a year old, and really didn't come back until she said to like middle school. Through that, I learned that I tried to do everything on my own. Didn't work out so well for me. Supermom did not work out really very well for me. I had bounced in and out of counseling and different types of counseling, and then we had been attending Broadmoor Baptist Church, and so I really was able to have a community around me for the first time in my life that wasn't my like blood family. And I didn't understand that concept, but looking back at it, when I first started to serve, which was Vacation Bible School, the women that I was placed with to serve with really just began to mentor me and love on me and finish raising me. I was 23 when I had Houston. I was 25 when I had Josie. I was a young single mom. I wasn't divorced yet, but I was a single mom.
Right.
And so they basically finished raising me and taught me what community looked like and taught me what service looked like. So then when the counseling center opened up that I go to now, I started to actively seek counseling and try to just work through the abandonment and neglect issues that I had from the divorce. Abandonment and neglect issues, I had feelings that God had done the same thing because I had begged for him to save this, and the marriage was not saved. By his grace, we made it through it, but the marriage was not going to remain. And so I counseled through that and battling for the marriage, and then counseled through the divorce there with some of the pastors. And then when the counseling center opened, I continued on with that. So we fast forward, and I remarried, and Philip loves us. He loved the big kids as his own from the very beginning. And then we had 3 more kids, and then just the trauma from the divorce had stuck with me for a long time. And that marriage ended in 2006, and so it's something that I still have to process things that come up. Like something came up 2 weeks ago, and I was like, oh man,
Right.
I thought I was through this, and I'm not. So there are things but now I can easily recognize that it's something that I need to talk out or to process through EMDR.
Can you talk a little bit about how those things, last and why that's okay? I think a lot of people, they move from a trauma, or they have something happen in their past, and they move, let's say, either time, or they move proximity, or they move distance, and then they pretend like that thing doesn't connect to the present. Can you talk about that?
Right. They all connect.
Yeah.
It all connects at some point. I can connect little T traumas from when I was little to the big T traumas that have happened, and they'll spiral. And it's because it's just if it's a loss across the board. If it's a loss of a marriage, if it's the loss of a house, if it's the loss of control in something, then they all just kind of, spiral together. And so I have learned through counseling ways to cope with those triggers that happen that end up coming up. Like 2 weeks ago, and I was like, oh man, this is another something that I didn't realize. I was like, okay, well, I can do some of it at home myself. Some of it I go back in and have help with. And I can realize that God has given me coping skills, and to use the coping skills that I've been taught to get through that. But the fact that they happened is okay. They happened. Like, they're never, ever going to go away. I really don't ever want them to go away because they made me who I am.
Yeah.
And without them, I don't have that testimony. And I think it's important for people to see that. And it's okay. It's okay for me to cry about it. It's okay for me to get angry about it. It's okay for me to just not have a good day. But like, just learning to cope with it and being able to move on from it is the bigger part of it. Mm-hmm. So I can have that trigger, I can have that little cry session or whatever it is, but I can move on from it rather quickly these days. So, and then recognizing when it's something that I can't move on from and I need extra help with, then I go back in and I work on that trauma or work on that incident or whatever happened. But it recognizing that it could be something very little. And little by one trauma I realized I had was from the dentist office when I was little. And so I went in, it was so crazy. Y'all, this is so crazy. So I went in, I had a counseling appointment after a dental appointment one day, and I went in with half of my face all numbed up. And I had almost passed out in the dentist chair. And I don't get nervous in the dentist chair unless they're using Novocaine. Mm-hmm. So I'm fine getting my teeth cleaned. And I walked into my session and I was like, I had the weirdest incident today. And I almost passed out in the chair and I was freaking out. And all I could remember was the smell of that Novocaine was like when I was little and I had 4 teeth pulled to get my braces. And my therapist looked at me and he said, and what did you just describe? And I was like, I don't know. And he goes, trauma. I was like, are you kidding me right now?
You're right.
I was like, okay. Now, it's not something I would look at as a major thing, but my body fully reacted to it. And I had a full-on trigger and anxiety attack that was uncontrollable. Yep. And so I was like, holy cow. Yeah, and that was brought on by a smell and a sound. Yep. So something that I didn't even realize, which I wouldn't consider a big, like, oh, I don't need to go talk about this to somebody. This isn't big enough to go talk about. And I was like, yeah, it's big enough that my body reacted, and I almost flipped out. Yeah. So,
well, yeah. Yeah, I always tell people, if you listen to our podcast all the time, you've heard us talk about this all the time, but I'll just cover it really quick. Little T trauma is, getting your teeth pulled at the dentist. Big T trauma is rape, sexual abuse, war. But you don't have to have a bunch of big T traumas for it to change your brain instantly.
Right.
Little T traumas can build up over time and then cause a really big blow up on top of a big T trauma. And so we'll talk about how that actually played out with the fire and stuff in a minute. But my definition for trauma is anything that's not nurturing. Right. And so, if you measure against worse things, it's real easy. Like as a veteran, I'll say, well, that's not that big of a deal. I wasn't special forces. Right. I shouldn't have PTSD. Right. Or people tell me all the time, well, my dad didn't beat me to death, and I'm like, well, you're measuring it against horrible things that would have substantially more consequences. Mm-hmm. Yes. But if you measure against what God intended you to receive, right? Then anything that's not what God intended you to receive causes some consequence. Right. And the other thing I do all the time that I love is like, would you want your kids to have gone through that? Right. And people are like, no. And I'm like, but it was okay for you and you're fine. Right. And I'm sure you've got all that. But, both of you understand and have worked through that. But, that's the integration piece, is being able to understand what you've been through, contextualize it, and let it no longer say anything about your worth and value. Right. But it doesn't mean it still doesn't affect your body. And Vanderkolk's The Body Keeps the Score, it talks about that idea that our bodies keep these memories, keep these things, connected. And you can't separate out the physical from the mental and the emotional and spiritual and all those things. And so, yeah, we can be in a situation and have a sight, a smell, a sound. I mean, seasons.
Seasons,
right?
Yes.
I mean, all the time I have things that happen and I'm like, oh, well, it's getting cold. Yep. That reminds me of this. And that could be good or bad.
Right.
We're all used to the good.
Right.
We're like, oh, we love Christmas. We love when this stuff starts happening and Christmas music is on in the store. It's usually July. And,
Yeah, exactly.
Lobby, lobby.
right. And it's like, we get prepared. But the same thing happens with negative things,
Yeah.
and a lot stronger. So it's a great segue.
Right.
Okay, so you have the divorce, you have your childhood, you have this blended family. You're dealing with all these things. Some of it you didn't go to therapy for. Then you go to therapy. You learn a little insight into those things. And then the house, and then better. Well, let's talk about you with Better at Bake Shack. So you, what I know is that you had all that stuff. You and Phil were married. You're doing well. You're going to Broadmoor, and you start the bake shop, and then you start doing it in your house.
Yes.
So
I started doing it in my house, and it was a huge blessing. It got a little too big for its britches, which is good, but there's only so much I can do as one person.
Right.
So it was going really well, and things are moving forward, and then when you think you're at a point where everything's coming along and you're not stressing about money week to week or whatever it is, then bam, something happens.
Right, and you had just gotten a new kitchen and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yes.
We had just remodeled the bathroom. My husband had remodeled the kitchen. My husband and my in-laws had remodeled this kitchen. And he had done a lot of remodel to the house. And so the last part of the remodel was like August, September, and then the fire happened in February. And it just made us all mad. It made us mad.
I bet.
We're just angry about all the work that we had done on top of the fact of all the loss that just happened.
Yeah.
And so the fire happened, like Josie said, fire happened on her birthday, which is a trigger. Then ends up later on that we're all waiting for this anniversary that happens to be on what's supposed to be her most fun day of the year.
Right.
And how do you deal with that coming up? This season, like you said, man, I tell you what, when it starts getting cool and the sky line looks the same as it did that night of the fire and it smells the same, the smells are more crisp, that's a huge trigger. Just the way the sky will look, I'll go, oh man, okay, I know where this is coming from, but oh man.
Right.
Yeah. And
so talk about that just in either one of you. I think the important part about therapy sometimes is it's not that it takes away all the pain or all the suffering or all the issues. It's that you know what's happening.
right.
Like, can you talk about that?
Well, I remember in particular, it was right before the anniversary of the fire, and I had gone to deliver a wedding cake outside of town, and my husband usually goes with me to drive. Well, he drives, and I tell him to go slower and not hit things and, all that. Because there's a wedding cake in the way. Because I'm like, anyway, that's how that all works every single time. But we were coming back into town, and I was like, oh, man. And I just started crying. And I was like, why am I crying right now? Why am I? Well, there was smoke off in the distance. It was January, so the time of day was about the same time of day the fire had happened. And I saw this smoke off in the distance, and I was like, I don't get it. Like, why does that bother me so bad? And he looked at me and he goes, why shouldn't it bother you so bad? He goes, cry about it. It's fine. He goes, cry about it. You'll move on in a little bit. And he's like, it's okay to cry about it. It's okay to be attached to it. And part of what I learned about me crying about smoke off in the distance, because I can tell when it's a house fire and when it's not. And I've sought out the house fires that I've seen because I feel so bad for the people that it's happening to. And so it's this part of me that aches for the people that it's happening to. And then I think, oh, if they don't have community, this is going to be really difficult for them. If they don't have somebody to talk to. And so sometimes I'll go seek out where the fire's at to love on the family or whatever. Do the smells bother me? And do the picture, it all bothers me. It all bothers me. But it doesn't bother me to the point that I don't want to do it anymore.
Right.
So I just allowing it to happen and being okay with the tears coming and being okay with, and sometimes I get mad. I'm like, why am I still dealing with this? I've counseled, and my husband is so encouraging in the fact. And he's like, because it happened. He's like, because it happened. And he's like, and it's who we are now. So cry it out, be mad about it, and we'll move right on. And usually takes me 30 seconds to a minute if the tears come. And generally it's when I get surprised by things. So if I get surprised by an emergency vehicle with lights or sirens, if I'm driving and they come up on me real quick, it surprises me, and then I cry about it. If I see them off in the distance coming, I have a little bit of time to prepare, and I don't cry about it. because it's not a surprise to me. Like that night that the fire happened, it surprised me when they came around the corner. Like I remember it perfectly when they came around the corner. So it's being in that same type of situation. And so my husband and my kids are actually all really good. Even the little kids say, "Mom, there's a fire truck." I'm like, "Thank you. Got it."
Right.
So just to put it on my radar, like, hey, this is what's happening. Or Phil will say, "I see lights. Just so you know, it's a police car." Or just, you know, because it tends to be the fire truck or the ambulance that trigger me the most.
Because there was a time we had moved into a new house that we were renting, and she was going to introduce herself to the neighbors. Well, there is a fire station on the end of the street, and she's about to go. She's about to go walk across the street to introduce herself, and fire truck just comes zooming down the street. And our new neighbors are just looking at her because she's just like, she's crying because she didn't realize that there's a fire station at the end of our street.
Right.
And she was like, "Give me a minute. Just give me a second." And then she cries, and then she goes, "Okay, hi, I'm Jenny Martinez. I'm your new neighbor.
I'm your new crazy neighbor."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they just looked at me, and I was like, "We had a fire. I'm actually okay, but that's a trigger, and
Yeah.
I just have to let it happen, and then I just move on from
No,
it."
and one of my triggers was that night of my softball game. It was the coldest game of the season. And they're the most miserable games of the season. So that just makes it worse. But one of them was then going to another game where it was super cold. Like, it was just... And it was, especially if it was an away game and it was super cold. Like, we had one the next year and it was freezing. But you're, like, I don't know, it's already miserable. And then, like we had said earlier, like, it just spirals and spirals. And then, like, I was talking about my shoes and how I wore Converse because that's what I always wore to travel in. And now I can't, like, ever wear a pair of Converse anymore because my Converse 4 years later still have a little bit of, like, soot and smoke on them. But they're a part of my life. And so I still have them. They're still in my closet. And I don't want to part with them because it's a part of my life. It makes me who I am. And so... I still keep them, but sometimes I look at them and I'm like, ugh, that happened. This is the reason why I can't wear them anymore. Right. But they're still what makes me, me.
Right.
Yeah, that's so good. I mean, I think that's again, I'm going to say integrating it again, but it's like you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater once you do the work.
Right.
You can have things that you look at. It doesn't mean you're going to wear them.
Right.
Or it doesn't mean you're going to carry them around.
Right.
But we all have little ways of contextualizing what we've been through and bringing it into the present, but also not fully bringing it into the present. And that's so, I mean, everybody has that story. I think to encourage people that are listening, if you have things in your life that you're so avoidant of or that you just don't want to deal with, you know, that's actually the thing you need to deal with.
Right.
You know, the analogy is kind of are you going to face the dragon in its lair, or are you going to face the dragon when it comes out and can fly around and shoot fire at you?
Right.
You know, either way, you got to face the dragon.
Yeah.
But pretending like it doesn't exist, right, is not going to help you. And so...
No.
The idea is if you face the dragon in the den, you might get the gold.
Right. Right.
Right. So there's a good end result, you know,
Right.
with dealing with these things that are difficult. But either way, you're facing it. And so a lot of people just put it off for many years until it comes up in a situation. I think the thing about the fire, I'll let you tell me. Tell me what the fire brought up. Two things. You were already in therapy working on things, so I would believe that helped.
Right.
Minimize the damage, the loss, because loss and grief, right? It's like whether it's family or dad or, you know, marriage.
Anything, yes.
It's like now all of that's right there. So can you talk about how it was beneficial to be in therapy to kind of work through loss and grief?
I mean, I think it was beneficial because we had talked about, like, different coping mechanisms that we had. We already knew a couple that we could use to, like, when those triggers were really bad. Like, mine was going to my first away game after the fire, and I was just mean that day. Like, I was mean. And I knew that, like, one of mine is just, like, zoning everyone out and just listening to music. Like, it doesn't matter what kind of music it is, but, like, if I'm just listening to music and I'm in my own world and I can just kind of think about the music and just kind of calm myself down. And that's what I did on the way home, because I realized, like, how mean I was like, all right, I need to be away from everybody and do what I can. And so I knew that was something that had helped me. Another one that has actually come up like recently because I was actually adopted on May 18th. Phil had adopted me. I'd asked him to.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so part of that was, kind of having to relive the stuff, like the reasons why I'm doing it. And so one of them, it's super simple. It's just like one of them's like counting down from a big number just to make you stop thinking about it. Or you have a minute to name as many ice cream flavors as you can. And like it's stuff that I still use, but it's stuff that like I already knew that I could because I was in therapy before the fire had happened. I was in therapy before my biological father's like last divorce had happened because the week on week off was so difficult. And so it was stuff that I already knew I could do to kind of calm myself down or make the situation a little less intense than it was.
Well, I think that's so important for you to say because I think there's not just one crisis we go through in life, right? There's not just one storm, there's not one difficulty. But if you wait for the big one, then they all pile up,
Yes.
and then it's hard to function. It's hard to make it. You do end up having to go impatient or, get on some heavy meds or do whatever. And not that any of those things are bad, but, that's the little T trauma buildup or multiple trauma buildup. And so when you're in therapy, when you're taking care of your emotional health, your spiritual health, your mental health, like in these other scenarios, now you have tools to equip you to deal with them way better. And so they don't take so much out of you.
Right.
Right. We call that resiliency.
Right.
Right. You build resiliency in yourself. And the other part is that, you can't judge, like it helps you to not judge other people for their own stuff.
Right.
Right. So as a family, when everybody's in therapy dealing with their stuff and let's say Josie's being mean, you don't have to be over there taking it personally.
Right.
You're like, why.
Yeah, you're like, well, you're triggered. This isn't personal. You still need to take personal responsibility and go listen to your music. But I'm not going to be over here freaking out because you're struggling because I just broke down because of a fire truck coming around the corner. Right. I mean,
exactly.
We get that stuff. So super helpful.
Yeah.
Have you heard the tall grass analogy for trauma and triggers?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So my favorite analogy for people listening is to help you understand what they're saying is that if you imagine you're walking down the street, down the sidewalk, and there's this tall, thick grass, and you're with your best friend, and a lion jumps out of the tall grass and mauls your friend, right? And you go through the next couple of weeks, you do the funeral, you miss your friend, and you're walking down another street in another neighborhood, and there's tall grass. What are you going to do?
Freak out.
Right. You're going to run the opposite direction. You're going to get hot. You're going to get sweaty. Your pulse is going to go up. You're going to get in fight or flight. Did the tall grass kill your friend?
No.
Right. And so we have all this tall grass in our life that is not the problem.
Right.
But we are so quick to avoid the tall grass that we never actually get to the problem.
Right. Yeah.
So we just find ourselves running away from or attacking everything at all points. And that stuff's just tall grass.
Right.
It's not the tiger.
Yeah.
And so therapy allows us to go, okay, let's be in a safe place. Let's bring a little bit of grass in here.
Right.
And let's tolerate it. And let's figure out, why am I upset by this grass?
Right.
And when you have a person who's not reactive and calm, they can help you see, well, maybe that's related to
yes, exactly.
getting your teeth pulled
when you're little. Yes.
And
exactly.
so, there's 100 ways that people explain that, but that's just one of my easier favorite ways. So yeah, for people listening, if you have things in your life that you don't understand why they're upsetting you so much, it's tall grass. It's not the problem.
Right.
There's a tiger somewhere that you got to deal with.
Right.
So yeah, it's good. Yeah. So the fire happens, and tell me, let's talk about EMDR.
Okay.
So y'all had done talk therapy, but the fire, how did that lead to maybe EMDR specifically?
I had started EMDR before the fire.
Okay, good.
When I was dealing with the kids' dad. I was still dealing with divorce and things that would come out that would set me off that I didn't realize bothered me at all or still bothered me. And so there were things I needed to go back and revisit in that to try to process through the EMDR. And so the best analogy that my counselor gave me at the time is that I was taking all these things that had happened, all these circumstances and emotions and everything, and I kept packing them away in this closet and packing away. We all have a junk drawer. We all have a closet or whatever. Right. We stuff our stuff in at home, right? And well, sometimes it gets so full that you're pushing it shut, and finally you get it shut and it's there. But then something happens somebody leaves the socks in the middle of the living room floor, which has nothing to do with the closet, but you open that door up and everything comes flying out at you. So that's what was beginning to happen with me not handling the divorce, like right out of divorce. I didn't know how to cope with that at the time. I didn't know the things that really bothered me, to tell you the truth, until I met Phil and then was remarried and then found out that, oh man, there are some things that I think he's going to do the same way that happened in my other marriage. And so that was really, and it was beneficial that my husband has all of his degrees in counseling psychology. And so I was like, did you know you need all those degrees just to be married to me? Because that's where this all comes from. Right. So anyway, so I had already started that, and boxing those things away in the closet. So the more I would process an event that bothered me or came up, I was able to go through the EMDR and sit there and, think about the incident, which is the hardest part. That's the hardest part, is to make yourself sit down and go through it again and really, really think about what was around you at the time and the smells or what the sky looked like. And then sometimes you realize people were there that you didn't even know were there. That happened after the fire. I was like, oh man, there were like 50 people there with me. Yeah. And I didn't even realize that until I went back through. And that was a blessing that the EMDR brought those things out. And so the EMDR would bring out a lot of scripture. And so I would see a Christian counselor. And so a lot of the ways that I am able to cope is through scripture. And so I would be in a processing session, and God would bring a verse to mind. And the Spirit would pull that out of me to combat some of the emotions and to combat some of the triggers. Sometimes, those are the verses that I use. And then those verses would show up, everywhere else, coincidentally, of course. Right. Yeah. That week, they'd show up in a box of clothes somebody had washed for us. And there would be note cards in the clothes, and people would bring them and drop them off to us with scripture on them. And so I had already started all that. And so I knew what it was about, but I knew right after the fire was not the exact time for me to start processing it. Yeah. So I literally had a counseling session scheduled that week that my friend drugged me to. I was like, I'm not going. I am not doing this right now. I already know. I know what this is going to do, and I don't want to do it. Right. I'm not there yet. And so that took a little while to start some of those steps. But
which is a perfect, normal, non-sinful human emotion, right? Avoidance. Jesus said in the Garden of Gethsemane, if there's any other way, take this cup from me.
Take it.
So, it's not a sin to not want to do the painful thing.
Right.
It's human. It's Jesus didn't want to go all the way, but it's our faith in the Father that eventually gets us there. Right. It's our trust in Him that goes, okay, I trust you, Lord.
Right.
And I trust this process. I trust connection. I trust community.
Right. So that was, I did go in that week and straight looked at my counselor and said, I don't want to talk about this right now. I don't want to. And he's like, okay, sure. And so, of course, I start, kind of just going through the emotions of it. I knew that I was not ready to sit and process it. It hadn't been long enough I was still in straight survival at that point, like the clothes on my back, all we had. And so needing to get through a little bit more of it needed to happen before I could actually start processing it. But the blessings that came out of the hard work that is EMDR are the good things that I saw through it. The people, when I go back through and I have to process something that I know is going to be difficult, God always shows me the good in it and brings that scripture to mind that He works together for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. And so I could see good things happening, and I could see community and the beauty in community and the beauty literally in the ashes. It's a literal, like it's a visual in our house when you can see the beauty in the ashes. And it was the community that came through that, and the ability to stand up against it. And our oldest son had been in counseling also, because a lot of what happened to Josie obviously happened to him. And because he had already started that, he came up, this is amazing, but he came up after school onto the fire. So, this happened right in the afternoon. Yeah. There's no calling him. There's no telling him, like, you pull up, your house is on fire. So he comes up, and he just runs into the neighbor's yard with me, and he just dropped to his knees. And I was like, oh, here we go. Like, I can't even handle myself right now, let alone handle you. And he just said, God, what is so big and beautiful on the other side of this that you want us to see? And he's like, I don't know what it is. He said, but Mama, he said, there's so much trauma right now. And he's like, we may not see the beauty in this side of heaven, but it's going to be there. And I just looked at him like, that just came out of your mouth. Like, who? Like, you
What?
were
High
the
schooler
teenage
just
boy
said that.
that we've taken kicking and screaming half the time.
You're supposed to be saying, why me?
And
Like,
yes, why me? And he's like, what is so big on the other side? And that just, I was like, he wouldn't have been able to do it because he couldn't do that a few months before when this other stuff happened.
Yeah.
But he was able to do that. And God used him in that moment to teach his 40-year-old mama how to handle it.
And that's, I mean, for people listening, I mean, that's literally the story of the Bible, right? Is that life happens to the people in the Bible and they go, where's God? And then God shows up and redeems it and makes beauty from these ashes. And then we get another opportunity later to go. And a lot of times, right, we get it wrong. We go, where is God? And we have the ability to question.
Right.
You know, when my brother-in-law's dying of brain cancer, things that I'm like, well, what in the, you know,
Yeah.
but the more mature you get in, and it's not that you don't doubt and you can't lament and you can't question, but you have this knowledge, okay, my faith says something is going to come after this, and this is going to be painful, but I have to trust that you're going to show up. And that, you know, that's all the Holy Spirit.
Right.
Yeah, that's definitely not us.
Yeah, no, it's not us.
Yeah.
We are not capable of that.
So can you, Josie, will you talk a little bit about EMDR for you and what, you know, that was like?
Yeah. So,
because some people are like, you know, so EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So you can do paddles in your hands that vibrate. You can do light board back and forth. You can do finger back and forth. You can do whatever, but it's a bilateral stimulation. So when you heard about this, what was kind of your instinct or?
well, like Mom said, she has done it before. And so when everything had happened with my dad and him being arrested and stuff, I did not want to do it just because I was so angry with the Lord and with my dad and just with everything that had happened. And so I didn't do it. I was scheduled to go in for an EMDR and I would tell my counselor, I'm not doing it. I will talk about it to you, but I can't think about this right now. And so I didn't really start EMDR till after the fire because that was the point where it's like, okay, you have nothing. You need to you need to think about it. You need to figure this out. You're
going one way or the other.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's when I had kind of started doing it, but I couldn't even think about the fire until I had thought about like everything that had happened. And it went all the way back to whenever like my mom and dad had gotten divorced, and I was barely even thought about that. I was one when he left. And so I was like, why is this making me so emotional? And my counselor was like, because it happened. She's like, it doesn't matter if, she's like, it doesn't matter if you were 1 year old or if you were 3 years old. Like, it happened and it affected your life and it affected y'all's lifestyle. And so I couldn't even get through to the fire. I didn't even process the fire till long time after it happened because I still had to process everything that had happened that Thanksgiving break before I could even about my birthday. But even then, like Mom was talking about community and how important community is. I remember that night also that he was arrested, or the night that we found out, I was supposed to go to a Friendsgiving with my softball team. And I told my mom, I was like, I have to go. I have to be around my friends. I have to do this. And then, and I did, and they just loved on me. And, you know, also with community, God blesses you with people that sometimes go through a similar situation. And one of my friends since 6th grade had gone through that situation, not to such a big extent, but having her father go to jail. And she was like, and I get it, and I'm here for you. And that's the one thing that I know about community is that God places so many different people in your life, and maybe you don't know it the second that he does it, but you know it later on. And with the fire, like Mom said, there's so many people that came, and my best friend Katie Reeves had her mom had called Mom and said, can she come over? She just wants to love on Josie. And the one thing about Katie Reeves is that she just listens and I just talk. That's all I do. I'm a talker and she's the listener. And all that night, her mom let her miss school the next morning so she could just be with me. All that night, she just let me talk. And that's what I needed. I needed that friend to just be quiet and just look me in the eyes and let me talk about everything that happened with dad and everything that happened on my birthday. And like, that's the one thing that EMDR also brought out, was the community that God provides for you through all the situations, whether it's just one person saying, hey, I know what you're going through, I'm here for you, or it's 50 people coming, and then the Sims family bringing a catering thing of canes for dinner because none of us had eaten.
Yeah.
And brought
we're food people.
And we're food people, but not just for our family, but for the high schoolers that were there helping out, and for their parents helping out, like board up the house. And that is the one thing I know that EMDR has brought out, is like looking back at it, the community that God has provided in each and every situation, even though you don't see it in the situation, you realize it later on after you've thought about it and you've looked back at it. Oh my word, look how God has provided for you through the struggle.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think what I try to explain to people is EMDR is a great tool.
Right.
You know, therapy in itself is kind of EMDR. If you're trauma informed, you're kind of doing EMDR all the time, right?
Right.
So part of EMDR is getting you to lean over into your right brain and feel and re-experience, not too much because you don't want to be over the top, but also bringing you back to logic where it's like, okay, let's make meaning out of this and what's true.
Right.
Because I think that's one of the biggest problems with maybe non-Christian psychology, I'll say that, I guess, is that you have to go to a truth.
Right.
Right, is that your beliefs have shaped your thoughts and feelings, which shape your actions. And so you can do CBT and you can do cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's super helpful to give you skills and tools. But if you don't address your belief system, then you're in trouble.
Right.
Because the next crisis, the next thing, you're going back to faulty beliefs.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's like, is God good? Are people safe? Am I worthy and valuable and secure in the storm?
Yeah.
In the circumstance? And if you don't truly believe that, it's going to be chaos the next storm.
Right.
Now you can, like now, you have skills, but your belief is what really gets you through it, right? It's like your faith, it allows you to go, no, I've seen community, I've seen love, I've seen grace, I've seen these things, and I believe them.
Right.
That doesn't mean I always feel them.
Right.
And there's a big difference.
Yeah.
Whereas, and I think sometimes what falls short, maybe in worldly psychology, is like, you're good.
Right.
You know, like at the end of the day, out of all your trauma, you're a good person. So you didn't deserve these things because you're a good person. Right. And I think sometimes that can stick us in this really weird, like, well, I know myself.
Right.
Right. Like I know the last 12 hours of my brain.
Yes.
And so you're telling me I'm good, but I'm not certainly, you know, and so it's like in Christ, you're good. Christ says you're good. You can stand in his righteousness and all these things. And I think being able to merge the two, if you're a Christian, is super important.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, the world can do what it wants to do, but as Christians, I think the value of therapy from a Christian perspective is to be able to integrate those two worlds.
Right. Well, and I think one of the biggest issue with therapy coming from being a Christian is that sometimes we look at ourselves and think, I can handle this, or I'm a follower of Christ. I know my scripture. I know this in and out. I don't really need that. That needs to be for other things, or this isn't big enough for that, or I should have it all together. And I told myself that for a long time. I can control this. I can raise these kids by myself. I. And that was not the case. And so the more that those walls were broken down and community was formed through the body of Christ, I saw how, you know, we all work together. We all have different spiritual gifts. We all have different things, and every single bit of it is important. And so I think as a Christian, just realizing that it's not my job to have it all together. Thank goodness it's not my job to have it all together, because if y'all know what went on in my mind most of the day, it is not all together.
Ditto.
Yes. And so that's not my job, but God has given us teachers and given us counselors to help us with those things. That's not my jam. I make cake. Like, that's what I do for a living. Like, that is not, and cake is something that other people use, and they use for fellowship, and I use that to bless people, and it makes people smile. And so that is a gift that God has given me, and can look at it as just cake, but it's not.
Absolutely.
It's service, and it's love, and it's praying over that cake before somebody eats it. And so we've all been given this opportunity. And so I think not utilizing our counseling and our counselors as Christians is just makes me sad. And so, because the more I get into it, the more I'm like, yeah, I'm just as broken as everybody else. We're all the same. Like, we are all the same. And so the sooner we see that in each other and realize we're all in the same playing field, the easier it becomes. And then you also at that point want to use that to help other people. I want to be community for somebody else.
I want to drive
over where the smoke is because
it's such a beautiful
hard.
analogy. Oh.
I want to follow the smoke. I want to stop and say, you will survive this, and this is how you're going to. And here's my phone number. Let me walk you through how to deal with insurance. Insurance is hard enough to deal with. It's a nightmare, but what I wanted through part of that experience, seeing the things that could have really helped me in that, I want to be that for other people.
Yeah.
And so God will use that and lead you through the smoke and hold off your tears till you get home so that he can use you in that moment.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
That's just what you want to, it's what you want to accomplish once you get far enough into it, I think.
Right, which then leads to purpose, which actually moves you out of the pain and the struggle because now it has meaning.
It has meaning. It has purpose.
That's good. Josie, talk to me a little bit about kind of your age group and therapy, because I feel like for me and your mom, for example, the old guys in the room, therapy.
Hey, speak for yourself.
Yeah, right. The thing is, and I was telling my mom this weekend, like when our parents grew up, there was no option.
No.
Right. So a lot of times we get mad and go, well, wish my parents would have been in therapy so they wouldn't. But it's like there wasn't an option.
There wasn't. Yeah.
And even when we were growing up, like, I mean, I went to a counselor once or twice, but trauma therapy, understanding addiction, and then being able to integrate it from a Christian perspective was, zilch. And there's still not a lot now.
Right.
But like even Grey's Anatomy has EMDR on there for an episode. There's all these cultural things that's making therapy more known. What's that like for your age group? Is that something?
I mean, as a student or as a middle schooler or high schooler, one of our sermons in Wednesday night church, our new student minister, Caleb Nichols, has said, y'all are the busiest people I know. And by that, he meant you just keep yourself busy. Like you're always doing something. And for me, like my day was I had school and then I had ball and then sometimes I babysat that night. Sometimes I had Bible study that night or I had church that night. My schedule was as maxed out as it could be. And it's a lot of stress. It's a lot of pressure. And you have school. And I'm thankful that like I'm not one of those people that took all the AP classes, because you have the students that will take every single AP class that they have and then they're under the gun, oh my gosh, I have to get this done. What am I going to do? And so it is so stressful. It is stressful being a high school student, but that's also stuff that we put on us, doing sports, being presidents of clubs, going to church and making sure we're doing our Bible study every night and all that. And, you also just, other people look at you and think about you and you're so worried about, I'll say that it's like middle school and like an underclassman in high school. When I got to junior year, I did not care. But you're so worried about what other people think about you, and you just put this wall up of, oh, I'm fine. Like, I've got it all figured out. And I'll even say I did that my freshman year. I was like, after everything had happened, I came back to school Wednesday, the day the fire happened. Everybody was checking on me. I was like, I'm fine. Like, don't want to talk about it. My best friend and I didn't go to the same school, and so I didn't want to talk about it to anybody else. And it's like, I'm fine. Just leave me alone. And so I think that's a hard thing with students, is that you just put this wall up of like, you're only worried about what other people think about you, and that if somebody asks you how you're doing, you don't want to open up about it. And you don't even want to open up to your parents about it either. Like, you're just like, I'm fine. Like, and that's where it stops. It's kind of like with the conversation, like if you haven't seen someone in a while, like, hey, how are you doing? It's like, oh, I'm good. How are you? And they're like, oh, I'm good. And that's it. Like, there's no, you never hear somebody say like, hey, how are you doing? It's like, hey, I'm really struggling. And if somebody does do that, you're not prepared to go, wait, what? Like,
right.
And so I think that's like going through school and like walking in the hallway, like that's typically what it is that you're like dressing a certain way, and you're also, if somebody asks you how you are, you're saying, oh, I'm fine, because you don't want to deal with the trauma that's going on in your life. You don't want to deal with the stress of the homework that you're going to have later in the day, or the stress that you're going to have in your football game against your rival team, like whatever. You just go, oh, I'm fine, put that wall up and be done with it. And so I'm thankful to have like one of my friends who has done like therapy, and we did it together, and we were able to talk about that and stuff like that. But it's not something I would say that young people know about or would want to do, like want to open up to that, because they just kind of want to go to school, go do their things, go to school dances if there are any, or go to football games, and like that just be it. And like just surface level life, like do the events of a high schooler. But if they're stressed or if there's anything else, they don't want to deal with it. They just want to keep doing what they're doing, and that just be it.
But I have seen God use her because she's been in counseling, and it'll be parents that come to me and say, hey, do you think Josie would feel comfortable saying something to my daughter about a similar situation? Or I'm really trying to convince my middle school or my high school to get into therapy, but they don't talk about it. So when she steps out, or her brother steps out, or her little sister steps out and waves the white flag, like, hey, absolutely. So, and we're trying to, in our household, really, we talk about going to therapy. I mention, hey, I have a counseling appointment today. I have a counseling appointment on Wednesday. Like, I say it multiple times so they hear it. She says it so the younger kids hear it. So then when things come up, it makes it okay for them to talk about it, or to bring it up.
Yeah.
Yes, it's totally normal. So she's getting ready to go to school, and little sister struggling with her leaving for school. She says she's my best friend. My best friend's about to leave for school. And I was like, okay. I said, so she goes, I need you to call and make me an appointment. I need to learn how to cope with this. It's not going away. Like, she's 11.
Yeah.
I was like, what'd you say? She goes, I need an appointment. I have to cope with this.
That's
it's
amazing.
not going to go away. And that was it. And I was like, okay, absolutely. We'll get you in. And so it makes it a part of life.
Yeah.
And so then hopefully she'll be able to talk to other middle school friends about that and be like, well, no, like, we all go. We're all good.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
So just being able to, I think that's going to be a big thing for parents of students that are counseling, is to be able to talk to other parents about it. And then hopefully we can start to break this stress and busyness and being able to see in your child that there needs to be some intervention that you can't fix.
And it's also it's also like I was saying, it's about like other people thinking about like what they think about you. And if people, like, if you open up like, oh yeah, like I go to therapy, it's like, whoa, like what's wrong? Like, it's not just no, I go to therapy, like I need a process because my big sister's leaving for school, and that's a big struggle. Like that's my best friend. Everybody thinks, like, when you think about therapy, it's like so big, like suicidal or like super depressed,
you're crazy.
That you're insane. And so whenever like you do bring up therapy, it's like, why are you going to therapy? But also, like, with me going to therapy, I have been happier. And like one of like Mom's favorite things to say is choose joy. And there will people that come up to me.
Hated that for so long.
Oh, we did hate it, but I love it now. I use it. But you'll have people come up to you and be like, what? You just lost your house. Your dad's in jail. Like, how are you still functioning? And it's a segue to talk about, well, this is what I do. I go to therapy because I have to process it. I can't just keep it all locked up. And it also, by going into also Christian counseling, and how like our counselors have done a great job of leading us and guiding us towards the Lord through it, while also giving us advice. And so it's a good segue to like talk about therapy and how I do EMDR and what it is and what like PTSD is, and then also saying and having a Christian counselor guide me to the Lord, and like Mom said, getting scripture and all that, because now like one of my favorite verses is Psalm 32:7, and it's, you're my hiding place, you protect me from trouble, and you surround me with songs of deliverance. And like songs, that's how I cope. And I have Hills and Valleys by Taryn Wells always in my head. And so it's a great, like, that's why the white flag, I do it, because through that and through using therapy and my struggles, I can spread the gospel to people who are struggling and wondering, what do you have that I don't have?
Yeah. Well, it's such a beautiful way too, like you said earlier, Jenny, to keep yourself in perspective too. You know, like it's always a humbling experience to say, hey, I got to boast in my weaknesses.
Yeah.
Right. And you can't boast in your weaknesses when you're trying to not have any.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, when you're trying to, I got to be everything, I got to do it. And I think that's the real struggle with this generation of high schoolers and little kids is I hear you talk about that and I'm like, man, I was not that busy.
No.
You know, I was just playing out in the yard. I mean, I had some sports and some stuff I did, but I didn't feel any pressure. I actually look back on my childhood and go, oh, that was the time because I didn't have anything to do and no responsibility. Right. But the teenagers I see and the people we see here, yeah, I mean, you guys are just maxed out with everything. It's like you're doing the adult world before you even become an adult, you know, and so you're so stressed out, you know, with things that, you know, I hate to say it, but aren't going to matter.
Right.
You know, like you said, the AP classes and stuff. Like I asked somebody the other day, I was like, you know, it was a teenage girl and she was so stressed out about finishing and making all A's. And I said, do you think that making all these A's and all these grades are going to make you happier? You know, because what's the end goal? Right. Well, if I make good grades, then I get into college, then I get a good job, and that's going to bring me money, so then I'll be happy.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm like,
well, or the goal to just get into college as a sophomore. That's a huge goal. Leaving high school. And I had a very wise friend who has gone before me and has older kids that said, hey, really, really think about it before you let them take all the AP, all the dual enrollment. Like, regardless, college is going to happen. If it takes you 4 years, it takes you 3 years. Yes, it's less expensive if you can get some of that knocked out in high school. But we really wanted our kids to experience high school, not college at high school.
Right.
And it was good not having a parent be like, you have to take AP English and AP History and AP Physics and whatever there was. And I didn't take any of that junior year. I took one honors class junior year. And junior year is always the year where the AP classes open up and the dual enrollment classes open up. And so all the junior class is stressed out. And I'm like, even with COVID, like junior year was my favorite year because I wasn't stressed out and I was able to enjoy high school and I ended up getting a boyfriend in the middle of junior year, but like I was able to just enjoy it and start to become like who I am and who I want to be. And this year, like I did tell my parents, I was like, I want to do dual enrollment and I want to take this AP psychology course. And all my core classes end up being dual enrollment or AP. And so great, I have some of those credits out of the way for this coming up school year. But
I don't think you did it as a reaction.
No.
And I think there's so many kids in high school doing things as a reaction and a fear of what I have to have instead of kind of learning to figure it out. Like, what do I need as a person? And so maybe you're a kid who loves taking AP and we're not saying that those things are wrong.
Go for it if that's all for you. But I didn't even end up taking the AP exam for psychology because I was like, I really enjoyed the class. I think I learned stuff, but we didn't go over a lot of like what would be on the AP exam and stuff like that. And so I told my parents, I was like, I'm not gonna take it. I think that if it's something that I do want to go into, that I'm prepared and I could go into it, but it's not something I think I could take this test and really be successful at it. And it was good having parents that supported, like, okay, like we're not gonna make you take it if you don't think you're gonna do well. It's a waste of money for us if you take it and then you get a 1 on it. And so that was really good having parents like say it's okay not to take all those courses, or it's okay, like if I was in dual enrollment and I was like, this is hard, I can't do it. Like it was okay. I could go to my parents and say, I can't do this next semester. I need to drop doing dual enrollment next semester because it's too hard. It's too much and it's too hard to do. And so it was really good knowing that I had that I had my mom and I had Phil to tell me, you don't have to do it, but if you do, we will help you as much as we can. Like we said, like my dad has a bunch of psychology stuff and he was like, I will help you through it if you need my help. And so that was good, just having that access of like, I'll be there to help you. I'll be there to support you. And if you end up still not feeling comfortable with taking the exam at the end or taking a CLEP exam or whatever, that's fine. We're here to just make sure that you also enjoy your school year and you do what you think you need to do to be successful. And I still think I'm prepared for school with only taking one AP course and not even taking the exam. I'm more than ready for taking those classes at Northwestern in a couple weeks.
I think the most important thing that I hear out of all this is that, and what I want, especially your age, to listen to if they're questioning therapy, or if there's a parent listening to this and you're like, should my kid be in therapy? First, maybe you should. I think the modeling of, as a parent, of going, look, I'm not going to ask you to do something that I haven't done.
Right.
And that being kind of normalized just as much as going to the doctor and getting a checkup, just as much as taking vitamins, exercising, budgeting. There are these things that we have to do in life that when our kids see us doing them, it becomes natural and normal. It's not this taboo thing. And it sounds like that's kind of what played out for you, is that it was already a narrative that was written. And so it wasn't as complicated. It didn't make it easier.
No.
Like, as far as pain and suffering, you're going to have to do the work. I think that's what people need to understand, is there's no way to do it and limp through it and it just be not painful.
Right.
But that pain brings about so much peace and so much joy because God does such a beautiful work in it.
Right.
So to kind of wrap up, tell us kind of what's birthed out of the fire. And, I know already that you opened the new shop over, you're doing the renting and all that stuff.
Right. But the fire has made us really realize that, as my husband said right after the fire, that people are greater than stuff. And when you lose all your stuff, what are you left with? And we were left with our community. We were left with our family. By the grace of God, none of us were hurt or killed in that fire. And that people are greater than stuff. And to just be able to see that and realize some of the things that we have wasted time on, to just not have a desire to do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Have a different desire and a different purpose now. And so God has used all the experiences, the fire especially, just as a platform and an opportunity for us to speak out about counseling. I think social media is good and it's bad. And that's another thing that kids are dealing with these days we didn't have to deal with.
And I was thinking, I need to have Josie and one of her friends just come on and talk about what it's like to be high schoolers.
At social media.
I'll do it.
Yeah. So, God has opened a door for social media for me to be able to share, hey, this is what's going, this is real life. It's not all pretty, but this is, these are the things that I remember. And, a couple weeks ago, I threw away pounds and pounds and pounds of paperwork.
Yeah,
that I had I had held on to it. I didn't really know why. I kind of know why now, but I had held on to this, and I was like, Kyle, I don't need it anymore. There's no need for it. And it was super freeing. But because of a social media platform, I think I had 6 people reach out to me and say, hey, okay, so what is this therapy? Do you think? And I was like, I'm not a counselor. I just go. I was like, I just go, but I know that if you're questioning it, you need to find somebody that can work with you. Mm-hmm. And so it has opened up a door for us to easily talk about it, because it was such a big trauma and crisis, and everybody saw it, and literally 5 o'clock news crisis.
Right.
Yeah. It just opened that all up. There was no hiding. There's no hiding that. You can't hide that. Mm-hmm. And so it opened up an opportunity for us to speak out about counseling and how much it has benefited our family and Christian counseling especially. So it's been a beautiful mess is all I can say.
Yeah.
A beautiful mess.
Like Mom said, it's people over stuff was the quote that Dad had thought about right after the fire, and it's absolutely right. And just, raising that white flag and saying, yeah, I'm struggling and I'm going through this. And like Mom said, 5 o'clock news. That was both of mine. That was in Thanksgiving. That was Thanksgiving break, and it was on my birthday. It was the 5 o'clock news of what happened, and it was people knowing and going like, "Hey, I saw this. Are you okay? What is going on?" And you had people. I had people in my school, people in my classes that some people I didn't even talk to since elementary school, and be like, I saw this. I don't know what I can do because I don't get it, but I'm here for you. And and then the community of people you don't really expect, Bird had found out that what had happened to the house, because a lot of teachers, knew my mom, and one of my teachers actually helped me with my hitting and stuff in softball, and she was actually my math teacher that year, and my class had raised $300 for us. And it was community you didn't expect, because there were kids in there that did not like. You always have those people that you just don't like. And there were kids that, I wasn't great friends, or I thought they were annoying, and they pitched in, whether it was $5 or there was a kid that pitched in $100. And it was the community that was like, okay, God, I see what you're doing here. And being able to use...
Very humbling.
Yeah, and then using that therapy, I think actually helped one of my friends. And now we kind of keep each other accountable. Okay, hey, she talked about therapy with me the other day, and I was like, all right, how you doing? And she's like, I'm okay. I had a session the other day, and I was working through some stuff that I didn't realize that I needed to work through. And so it was good, we have that accountability with each other of be like, all right, how you doing? Or do you need another one? Or whatever. And so it was showed me the community that God has provided me, but then also allowed me to use the trauma that has happened for other people that would go through that in the future potentially, or just say, this is what I struggled with, and go, wow, I'm struggling with some stuff too, and be like, Christian counseling and EMDR has helped me so much, because I've been able to process it, and I've been the Lord has been first through it. I've been told to go to the Lord and run to the Lord, and Scripture has come through that.
Yeah, I would say, as a Christian counselor, what she mean, and what I know they both mean, and what I would want people to know, is that when we say run to the Lord, what we mean is run to truth.
Right.
Because at the core of it is the real pain is you feeling unloved, unworthy, not good enough, uniquely broken, and then super insecure in your relationships and in the world.
Right.
And so if you don't believe you have worth and value that's intrinsic, if you don't believe there's a God who loves you and is for you and is making good out of that, then all the rest of the therapy, all of the books, all of the tools are not going to work.
Yeah.
They're going to fall on their face, because you're going to end up without truth. And so it's like when people say you need more Jesus, it's like, I get annoyed sometimes with that, because would I pull Jesus out of the air? Go to the Word. It's like, well, that's true, but people don't even know what that means.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, and yet what I've heard over and over is Jesus is in us. In community, the Holy Spirit is living in us. And so when we're with each other and we connect, this podcast, people that listen, it's that connection piece that really that is needed. And for a lot of us, we've never had that with other people.
Right.
And sometimes we've never had that in the church.
Right.
Yeah.
We've been in Bible studies, we've been in things, but we've really never been vulnerable or seen somebody vulnerable, because maybe they haven't done the work.
Yeah.
Right.
And so what I always see is that it helps us to be such better discipleship makers, right? Because we make disciples when we can look at people and think, we would never say, I would never do that, and how can they do that?
Yeah.
Right? Because when we have a lens, when we walk around our life going, I was talking at the sheriff's department in Bossier this morning, and I was saying, when we walk around going, I don't understand why somebody would do that. Well, then we haven't done any work.
Yeah.
Because we should all understand our ability to sin and be broken, because we've worked through why we are how we are.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And if we haven't done that, what Christ calls us, that renewing our mind, Paul talks about, then we're projecting our own stuff on everybody else, instead of being able to be available for them and listen for a night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? So if you make it about you and your pain, of course you can't hear somebody else. You're not going to be able to sit with their pain, because you can't tolerate your own.
Right.
But therapy allows you to heal, so that you can not just sit in it, but go and be there with people. And that doesn't mean that you won't be in pain.
Yeah.
Right.
Right? As therapists, we're human.
Right.
When I have a kid talking about divorce, you talking about that making me cry today, because it's like, no matter how far I've worked through it, that's always going to be part of my story. And we empathize and understand it. Right? And so, but we accept that suffering as Christians. We accept driving up to somebody's house going, okay, I know this is going to sting. I know this is going to be a little triggering. I might need 30 minutes afterwards, but it's worth it, because there's a greater purpose in it.
Right. Right.
Right? It's not, I'm going to be a Christian and I get to go through life never feeling any pain or suffering, because God's good and Jesus is good, and I know that, so therefore I can go into any environment and I should be fine.
Right.
It's like, no, that's not how Jesus modeled it. Jesus cried. He was emotional. He was afraid. He was in pain, and he still met with, the lost and the hurting, but he hurt with them. And so I think y'all have painted that picture really, really beautifully in your story and in your testimony. And I've known y'all for a long time and love you both so much, and I'm so thankful for your friendship and your community and what you brought to our church and our community and our lives, you know, with our kids going through allergies and all the things y'all have done to serve us in our house fires, you know, like that's the way I think of it. You know, it's like going through the allergy stuff. That's why I just kept thinking in my head with Grady and his issues. It's like, it was the same way. People showed up and cooked meals for us in the right way. We could trust people. We could serve people. And yet now JC gets calls all the time for people with FPIs or people with food allergies. And she's able to go, let me talk you through this. Let me tell you what's going to happen. Let me go ahead and intervene ahead of time because I know what they're going to get. Kind of like with you in the fire. I don't know if you know, but JC's house burned when she was like 17, I think.
No, we didn't know
So
that.
her and her mom like lost their whole house, everything. They didn't have any clothes, you know, the same thing. So I've heard it from a personal story too on her end. And so I remember when it happened for you guys, and just, I was so proud of your testimony that you got in therapy. I know we had talked about it multiple different times, but it's just been really cool as a therapist to see you and a friend and a Christian, to see you guys do it the right way. You know, for the Holy Spirit to come in as a whole family and watch you guys, like, you know, so hats off to you, Jenny and Phil, because, you know,
not me.
Yeah, well, the Holy Spirit in you, right?
Yeah.
But sincerely, it's been so cool to watch the Holy Spirit in your family and just to see how much you guys have done, because, you know, look at your kids. Like, look at how thriving they are, and you know, how much they're going to do for the Lord despite your suffering and despite the hardships. And that makes it worth it.
Right.
You know, so.
Which is what was prayed for. And they, you know, a long time ago. I've just prayed for them to be able to use, starting out at the very beginning with the divorce, to bring God glory and honor, and for God to be able to use that. And it is evident in them, and it's such a blessing to watch. It's a very humbling experience.
Definitely. Well, we didn't give Phil any credit, but, you know, that guy, he's out there.
Man.
That guy.
He's the biggest hearted, you know, doing so much amazing work on his end. And
He's
I know he's been a
incredible,
pillar in you guys' life, and especially for you, Josie, and, you know, your brother and sisters. And, you know, so shout out to Phil. Thank y'all so much. Is there any closing thing you'd want to say to the community or people listening?
I would just like to say, if fear is holding you back because people tend to be afraid to make that next step and to go into counseling and to seek help, that you don't have to be a slave to the fear, for lack of a better term. The fear is not Christ. The fear and the chaos. You know, we serve a God that is not a God of chaos and not a God of fear. And though it's hard work, the reward is great. And just seek it out, get over the fear part of it, and take that first step.
That's good.
And it's okay to struggle. Like, it's okay to throw in the white flag and say, I'm not okay, and that I need help, and that even if you don't end up going to counseling, just because it's scary, and thinking like, and saying, oh yeah, I do go to counseling, finding a church body is the next thing I could say would come close to it. If you're not going to go searching and like seeking the Lord, a church body is the next best thing, because I can tell you that, like, even we saw it in adults that have already lived their life, and then we've seen it in people that are younger than me in Houston, and then like the seniors of my freshman year. And I would just say it's okay to struggle, and it's okay to admit to it. But if you are scared, then find a church body that in a community that's going to love on you and lead you to the Lord through it.
That's good. Yeah. And if you're out there and you've been to therapy, and you haven't told your story, find ways to tell it. You know, don't be scared to boast in the work you're doing, because it's going to only lead to other people being vulnerable. And, you know, I know that in my own story of telling people stuff that, like, other people are like, why are you saying that out loud? You know, but it's like, it allows people to be open. you know, and it's a balance. You don't want to make it about you, and you don't want to, you know, make their story about you and be that person that's like, well, let me tell you about my, you know, right. Yeah. We don't want to do that. But I think when you go to therapy, you learn how to do that appropriately,
right.
You know, and make their story about them and all that. So, well, thank y'all so much.
Yeah.
This was
Thanks
awesome.
for having us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
If you're listening, still subscribe, please, like our Facebook page, you know, all the stuff that you know to do that people say on podcasts. God bless you and have a good week.